Welcome back to the channel. I'm Andy, aka Caps Coverage, and today I'll be going through the whole Metro Division's offseason so far in 2024, with most of the big name free agents off the board signed to their teams. Go through each team in the division, what they lost, what they gained, and how I think they fare from last season to this season. Who got better, who got worse, and who stayed right about the same. We're going to go in alphabetical order here, starting with the Carolina Hurricanes, who I know had a lot of losses, but I personally think that they had a very good offseason. They brought back Jordan Martinhook, which I think is a good deal for them. They also signed Jack Roslovic, Tyson Jost, and Eric Robinson to fill out their depth, but they made three signings that I really loved, the biggest one being Sean Walker, a very steady defensive defenseman, right-handed shot, had a nice rental run with the Avalanche, played in 18 games for them, had 7 points, was really good with the Flyers before the trade deadline. He had a career year for them. And then in the playoffs, he was just a really steady presence for Colorado. For 5 years at $3.6 million, that is a very good deal for a super steady defenseman. Similar one for Shane Gostisbehere. I thought that was one of the other best puck-moving defensemen on the market this offseason. They got him for 3 years at $3.2 million per season. Last year in Detroit, he played in 81 games for the Wings. Good power play guy, had 10 goals and 46 assists for 56 points. In contrast to Walker was their big defensive guy. Gostisbehere is going to be their big offensive defenseman. Two additions I really love for Carolina. And then the last one was one I saw a lot of people giving them hate for, but I really liked the William Carrier signing, 6 years at $2 million per season. I know that giving 6 years to somebody who's been a career fourth liner is risky, to say the least. But this guy was one of the original Golden Knights. He had been with the franchise since the expansion draft, and he's just been such a consistent performer. In 413 career games, he has 107 points. Great fourth liner, great penalty killer, can give you a lot of hits, going to play solid defense in his own zone, not a slouch offensively either. Obviously, the outs are going to hurt the Hurricanes, though. Jake Gensel, I know that he was only a trade deadline rental. A lot of people expected him to be a rental, but with the ways that contract talks were going right leading up to free agency, there was some hope they'd bring him back, but he ultimately signed that big contract with the Lightning. That one's going to hurt, but I mean, they played most of the season without Gensel anyways. I think they'll be fine. Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, 2 losses on the back end that I think will hurt them, but I would honestly take Walker and Gostisbehere at their price tags over the deals that Pesce and Shea signed in New Jersey and Nashville. Teravainen's going to hurt the forward depth a little bit, but they couldn't afford to bring him back. And since they have Seth Jarvis and Martin Necas and Jack Drury all unsigned as RFAs. That being said, I think that ultimately, amid all the trade rumors, all 3 of them will be coming back since they lost Gensel, Pesce, Shea, Teravainen. They have the cap space to bring back all of Jarvis, Necas, and Drury. Overall, I think this is going to be a very solid offseason for the Canes, assuming that they can re-sign all 3 of those guys. Next up are the Columbus Blue Jackets. Not a great team last season, but I think that they made a solid move here with Sean Monahan, signing him to a 5-year deal valued at $5.5 million a year. Obviously, he was playing on that big contract he signed with the Flames and then got shipped to Montreal after he was very much not living up to that deal. Then in 2 seasons with the Canadiens, he put up solid numbers, earned himself a trade deadline rental to Winnipeg, played in 34 games for the Jets last season, got 24 points in those 34 games, and then before that, he had 49 games with the Canadiens and had 35 points, so he kept relatively the same pace. He's clearly more of that player that Calgary signed him to when he first signed that deal and not the guy that he was when they traded him away and playing fourth-line minutes. So I think that's a pretty solid addition for Columbus, although the 5 years is scary for somebody who's 29 and has shown in the past that he has not lived up to contracts. So fingers crossed for them that he can work out. They brought back Jack Johnson on a 1-year deal at league minimum, fill out their defensive depth, got Dylan Gambrell to fill out some forward roles. And then this is the only draft pick that I put on there because I think Caden Lindstrom has a really solid shot to make the Blue Jackets out of camp this year. He's the only of the first-round picks that I think has a shot at making their team, and if he does, that would be a big help for Columbus. He's a great center. Their biggest loss of the offseason is Alexander Texier, who they traded to the Blues. Aside from that, Jake Bean and Brendan Gaunt's not huge, not hard to replace. This is still a rebuilding team, so I don't think they're too worried about losing depth guys like that. And then their unsigned restricted free agents, Marchenko and Sillinger, I'm sure that they're going to want to lock up both of those guys long term. And then I also put on Jet Greaves here. Really good goalie in the AHL for the Monsters. With all the rumors surrounding Merzlikins in the NHL level, the Blue Jackets trying to trade him, I wouldn't be surprised if they give Greaves a solid contract and bring him up to play for Columbus this year instead of sending him down to the Monsters for another season. All right, now we move on to one of your busiest teams of the offseason, the New Jersey Devils. So they had a glaring hole at starting goalie, and instead of going through free agency where the market was pretty thin, they went to the very heavily populated trade market and got Jacob Markstrom from the Calgary Flames. Markstrom's got 2 years left, and because of retained salary, the Devils will only be paying him $4.125 million for each of those 2 years. Markstrom, in my opinion, is a top 10 starting goaltender in the NHL. He had a .905 save percentage in 48 games for the Flames last year, but that was a very bad Calgary team, and his underlying numbers were really, really good. This guy is going to be great with a much better team in front of him, which he will have in New Jersey, and I think New Jersey is going to benefit a lot from having an actual starting goalie. Last year they were throwing out Vitek Vanacek, they were throwing out Jake Allen, Capo Kakinen. They never had a real starter, and having somebody like Jacob Markstrom who can get you 50, 60 starts in a season, that's going to be huge for the Devils. They also signed Brett Pesce and Brendan Dillon to shore up their defense. Pesce, 6 years at $5.5 million. I think that's a very solid deal for Pesce. As I said, the Carolina part, I understand why they let him go. But this guy, very consistent defenseman. Last year he played in 70 games for the Hurricanes and had 13 points, but a very good defensive defenseman. $4 million a season for Brendan Dillon. A little rich for my liking. But yeah, aside from that, Stefan Nason, fine deal, 3 years at $2.75 million, fills out your depth. Paul Cotter, I think, is a solid addition, but I'll get to why I don't like that move for them. And then they also brought back Tomas Tatar on a 1-year deal at $1.8 million. Guy who's been struggling recently. Give him a prove-it contract in a place he's played before. I'm fine with that deal for New Jersey. Their outs, Kevin Ball went to Calgary in the Markstrom deal. John Marino they sent to Utah to clear up space on the blue line for the Pesce signing. And then this is why I don't like the Paul Cotter trade. They gave up Akira Schmid, whatever, and Alexander Holtz. I know that Holtz has struggled in the NHL level, but this is a guy who used the 7th overall pick on in the 2020 draft, had his first full NHL season with you last year, had 28 points in 82 games. I know that that is not what you're looking for from a 7th overall pick, but I feel like you've got to be able to get more than just Paul Cotter in a draft pick when you're giving up somebody with that much trade value. As far as their biggest unsigned restricted free agent goes, that would be Dawson Mercer. I would assume that they get a deal done there, and it's going to be relatively inexpensive. Now we move on to the age-old tradition of Lou Lamoriello doing almost nothing in the Islanders front office, but this year he made a solid move. So first thing was he re-signed Mike Riley, 1 year, $1.25 million, whatever, shore up your defensive core, that's fine. And then he also gave Anthony Duclair a 4-year deal at $3.5 million a season. This is a deal I really like for New York. Duclair is a player who struggled with consistency in the past, but he is a winger who can score in bunches, and as he proved last year in his brief stint with the Lightning, when he's with a team that he wants to be on, he will perform. He had 15 points in 17 games for Tampa Bay, then in the playoffs had 2 more in their 5-game loss in round 1 to the Panthers. I think that Duclair signing a 4-year deal, he's committing to the Islanders. It's a place he wants to play, so he'll be more like that guy who got 15 points in 17 games for the Lightning than he has been for other teams at other points in his career. And even if he doesn't, at only $3.5 million, if he turns into a third liner, that's a perfectly fair rate for a third liner. Love this deal for the Islanders. And then as far as their losses go, they really didn't have any big ones. Sebastian Aho, the other one, signed with the Penguins. And then Clutterbuck and Bortuzzo are currently unsigned, but that's just kind of a Lou Lamoriello thing that he doesn't like to sign players if he knows that they'll come back, so I wouldn't be surprised if either of those two guys end up signing with the Islanders before day one of the season. Next, the defending division champion and President's Trophy winner New York Rangers. Their biggest move of the offseason was adding Riley Smith from the Penguins for a pair of draft picks. Riley Smith, solid middle six winger. In 76 games for Pittsburgh last season, he had 40 points. He was one of the original Golden Knights, had a really good run with Vegas, won a Stanley Cup with them in 2023. Smith is a very solid player, but he's not going to be a huge needle mover if that's what the Rangers were looking for, especially 1 year at $3.75 million, purely a rental, if you ask me. I don't think they'll be able to re-sign him. Speaking of re-signing, though, they did actually bring back Kaapo Kakko at a 1-year deal at $2.4 million. I think that's a fine deal for Kakko. I don't think he's going to be in New York's long-term plans. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's not on the roster to start the season, but at the moment, he does have a contract from them. Their only real addition through free agency so far has been Sam Carrick, who they signed to a 3-year deal at $1 million a season. Fine for a fourth liner, have no problems with that. Then they had a lot of subtractions, though. They lost Barclay Goodrow, who was waived after reports said that he declined to waive his no-trade clause for the Sharks. The Rangers put him on waivers, and he was claimed by San Jose, and reportedly Goodrow was not happy with how all that turned out, but point is, he's a Shark, he's not a Ranger anymore. They also lost Eric Gustafsson, a couple of deadline acquisitions in Jack Roslovich and Alex Wenberg, and then Blake Wheeler is still currently unsigned. I don't think he goes back to the Rangers. He had a solid run with them, but they seem to have filled his holes in other ways. Their big restricted free agents who are currently unsigned are Braden Schneider and Ryan Lindgren. I don't see why either of them would go unsigned. I think both of them will reach deals before training camp starts. But then there's also the issue of Jacob Trouba. He is still currently on the roster, 2 years left at $8 million a season. However, there were rumored trades to Detroit that reportedly fell through because of no trade clauses, and then there was talk about putting him on waivers to just get rid of him, and then that never happened. I don't think anybody really knows what's going to be going on with Jacob Trouba, but if the Rangers do lose him, obviously $8 million a season is a lot for somebody who's a defensive defenseman, but he's a leader for that team, he's their captain, and that would be a huge loss for the Rangers from a locker room perspective, if you ask me. But if they need to clear up cap space, it's a move that I think they'd have to make, although I don't know what they'd be trying to do at this point with all the big-name free agents off the board, and then Braden Schneider and Ryan Lindgren combined will make less than Jacob Trouba, so I don't see why they would need to clear that cap. Now we're on to the Philadelphia Flyers, a team that's mostly the same. They brought back Bobby Brink on a 2-year bridge contract and also added Eric Johnson on a 1-year deal at $1 million. I think that's going to be a trade deadline flip. But their big addition this offseason is going to be Matvei Michkov. Obviously, no NHL experience yet, so you're never 100% sure what you're going to get, but I think this guy's going to be really good. In 48 KHL games last season, he had 41 points. Michkov is going to be a very good player. They coerced him over from the KHL. He still had 2 years left on his contract, and then they decided to terminate it. They let him come over. He signed his entry-level deal. He's excited to be a Flyer, is what all the reports are saying, and I think that he'll be a solid player, but again, never played in the NHL before, you never know. Could not work out in the first year. Their biggest loss of the offseason was, I guess, Cam Atkinson, who they bought out, but really they didn't lose anybody. This Flyers team's going to be a lot more of the same that they were post-trade deadline last season after they got rid of all of their players who they sent off on rental deals. I don't expect much from them. I think that they're much similar to the team who they were post-trade deadline and not pre-trade deadline. I think they're probably a sixth-place team. I don't think they did anything to really move the needle unless Michkov really is that game changer that a lot of people think he could be, but I'm not ready to say that for a guy who has 0 games of NHL experience to this point. And now we move on to the Penguins, and I don't even know what they're trying to do here. So their biggest addition of the offseason was, I guess, Kevin Hayes, who they took on from St. Louis for a second-round pick. They got a second-round pick with Hayes to take on the remainder of his contract. In 79 games for the Blues last season, he had 29 points. Like, this is a guy who's fallen off from his better days when he was a Ranger. And Matt Grzelcyk, Sebastian Aho, the other one, not the really good one, Blake Lizotte, Anthony Beauvillier, and re-signing Emil Bemstrom. This is just a lot of moves encouraging mediocrity. These are a lot of guys who I think Pittsburgh's targeting to trade at the deadline. I don't see the vision in Pittsburgh. They don't have a future. It's Crosby's last year of his deal. If this is their quote-unquote all-in push, I wouldn't be surprised if he requests a trade to try and win one more cup, because this is not an encouraging offseason start. And then their losses, they got rid of Riley Smith, who was one of their better players last season. They have not re-signed Jeff Carter. I think he'll probably end up retiring, and then P.O. Joseph went to the Blues. But yeah, this is just an offseason that looks like it's asking for mediocrity from the Penguins. I don't think that they really got better in any way. I'd honestly say that they got worse. I'm not sure how much of an upgrade Kevin Hayes is over Riley Smith. If anything, it's a big downgrade. And yeah, it seems like they're officially starting to rebuild, and I would not be surprised if Crosby does not finish the season as a Penguin. And then all of these moves I've obviously gone in depth on in the channel in the past, but the very busy Washington Capitals, their additions of the offseason, they added Pierre-Luc Dubois from the Kings, Andrew Mangiapane from the Flames, Logan Thompson from the Golden Knights, and Jacob Chikrin from the Senators, all of those through trades. In free agency, they signed Matt Roy, Brandon Duhaime, and Taylor Radish. They re-signed restricted free agent forward Connor McMichael. And then this is one of the only minor league signings that I put on the board. They signed Ethan Frank to a 2-year deal at $775,000 a season. And the reason I put this one in the video is because I think there's a very real shot that Ethan Frank makes the team out of camp. The Capitals have a very left-handed heavy forward core, and Frank is a very fast right-handed shooting winger. Simply to split up handedness, I would not be surprised if he makes the opening night roster as a third-line winger, just to get another righty on there and balance out the forward core a little bit more. As far as their offseason losses, they have Darcy Kemper, Nick Jensen, Beck Malenstein, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, and most likely Max Pacioretty. They have no more unsigned RFAs, even the guys who are just going to go back down to Hershey. All of them have contracts now. But yeah, I think the Capitals definitely got better. They made a lot of moves to improve that core that dragged itself into the playoffs despite being a bad team. And I think that they could be a solid team next year. So overall, the teams that I would say improved in the Metropolitan Division are the Hurricanes, Blue Jackets, Devils, and Capitals. Teams that declined, I would say, are the Rangers and the Penguins. The Penguins, I know that I said they were encouraging mediocrity, but honestly, looking back at it, it's just a lot of guys who I think they plan on shipping out at the deadline. I really think that they got worse as a team this offseason, despite not making many subtractions and just adding a lot of small additions. And then teams who I would say stayed about the same, the Islanders and the Flyers. Again, I know Michkov could be a really good player, but I'm not going to fully commit until I see him play in the NHL. You just never know how that transition's going to go sometimes. And then the Islanders, as much as I like the Duclair addition, that's really all that they did, and Duclair is not a needle mover for New York. Thank you for tuning in today. This was a bit of a longer one, but something that I thought would be nice. Get a little look around the division, not just what the Capitals are doing. What are their biggest rivals doing? What are their biggest opponents? The teams that they're going to need to get ahead of if they want to make the playoffs for a second year in a row. What have those teams done this offseason? Hope you enjoyed the video. Like it if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Which team in the division do you think had the best offseason? Which team do you think had the worst? Do you agree? Disagree with me? I want to hear all those in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.